Good day. This is Charles Dedham, Chairman of TMIT, and I am very pleased and honored to welcome everyone today to our webinar, our global webinar in patient safety and quality. We are really delighted to have a terrific program for you today, and I will move very, very quickly through our introductions and get started because we just have a spectacular set of speakers. What I'd like you to do is move to slide 3 and remind all attendees to increase the volume of your computer and make sure that the audio is as good as possible. And if for any reason that you have difficulty, down in the lower left corner of your screen, and I'm on slide 3, you can click on the telephone icon and request another phone line. I'm now on slide 4, and I'd like to remind you that you may go to safetyleaders.org, www.safetyleaders.org, and up in the upper right-hand corner of the landing page is where you can access receiving the slides. For those that are just on the phone at this point in time, you can go there to get the slides and also download transcripts within 3 business days. I'd also like to draw your attention to the Journal of Patient Safety. I'm the editor-in-chief, and we are very honored to announce that Sir Liam Donaldson, the former Chief Medical Officer of the United Kingdom and the current envoy for patient safety for the WHO, has joined the journal as an associate editor, along with Dr. Stephen Swinson, the former head of quality and current head of leadership for all of the Mayo Clinic, Dr. Mike Henderson, the head of quality for the Cleveland Clinic, and Dr. David Bates, the Chief Medical Officer for the Brigham and Women's Chief Quality Officer and the head of the Patient Safety Center, who's also the head of research for the World Health Organization. And finally, Professor Thomas Zeltner has just been appointed this week to be the global envoy for the World Health Organization for finance, and is also our associate editor for global programs. So I think we've got a world-class group that have joined us. Slide number 5 addresses where you can go to download the materials from today's webinar, and I'll move to slide 6 and remind everyone that you can follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and that the hashtag is #SafetyLeaders, all one word. I'll go to slide 7. Our mission is to save lives, save money, and build value in the communities we serve. And as we are expanding globally, this mission is identical. Slide 8 addresses our disclosure statement. I will not read it, but please note that no products, services, or technologies for any commercial application will be discussed today. And slide 9 is an additional disclosure statement. And what I'd like to do now is move to Jennifer Dingman. Jennifer, as always, will be our patient representative for the voice of the patients and families. I've known Jennifer for many years. Jennifer is now a published author in the patient safety community and peer review articles. She's the founder of Persons United Limiting Substandards and Errors Pulse, Colorado Division. She's one of our TMIT patient advocates, and she's a frequent expert on patient and family engagement on national programs. But most importantly, Jennifer brings real heart and soul and a desire to help patients and families, and is always there to help patients and families, and does so in an informal way, which I think is terrific. Jenny, would you give us a 30-second introduction to set our minds straight as we get started?
Hello. I just wanted to welcome everyone to this webinar today. I think you're going to get so much out of it. And just on behalf of all patients and families, I want to thank you all for being here and having the open mind to learn more and more about the things that we're going to discuss here today. I can't thank you enough for being here, and it's a great day. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Jenny. Our panelists today, who I will introduce more formally as each one speaks, will be Jim Battles from the Agency for Healthcare Quality and Research, longtime friend, one of my lead committee members on the National Quality Forum Safe Practices, a fabulous contributor in multiple areas of safety. Dr. Frank Maza, one of the great leaders from one of our great systems in America, the Ascension Healthcare System, will be addressing human factors issues as well, and we'll be coming back to them at the end after they have their formal presentations. I'd like to start off, however, by focusing on the granular and really critical issues that we have before us and mention to you, and I'm on slide 12, and now advancing to a recent article that came out in the New York Times, and there are a number of slides that address more than one article regarding the boy who could fly, who wanted to fly. This is a young man, Rory Staunton, who passed away after having a cut, developed septicemia, and his case, and I don't want to get into the details of an analysis of this case, but represents one of the most important areas under the waterline for us, which is missed and delayed diagnosis and systems issues. So slides 13, slides 14, and slides 15 address an issue regarding this young man whose parents brought him to the emergency department of a hospital. Blood was drawn. Test result, the loop, as the articles state, because we haven't done an analysis on this ourselves, state that critical test results were not delivered to caregivers for whatever reason, we don't know, and to the family, and Rory passed away. And so we'll take a deeper dive on cases like this in future presentations. But yesterday I had the honor of interviewing Sully Sullenberger, who is this young man's hero, and I interviewed him yesterday for our next Discovery Channel and probable PBS series. And what I'd like to do is play for you Sully's comments and sentiments for just a few minutes and defer my time for formal presentation to Sully from our interview yesterday. I'm speaking from San Francisco, where I met with Sully yesterday and with the leadership of the American Hospital Association. So just briefly, we will come back to Sully, but I thought that it was such a powerful message that Sully had. He reached out to the family, and I won't share what he said. However, he was very touched by this young man and really believes very strongly that the systems issues that are absolutely critical that leaders need to be aware of are vital for us to address. And in future, we will be addressing delayed and misdiagnoses as we go through the dialogue. So Kyle, let me know on chat when we'll be ready, and at a timely moment, maybe between Dr. Battles and Dr. Maza, that we'll go ahead and roll Sully's tape. I'm on slide 17, addressing the Safe Practice 1 from the National Quality Forum Safe Practices, which we're updating in a book that will be a guide to leaders as we wait for the next cycle of the National Quality Forum. It addresses this critical area of leadership and ties to the leadership the issue of culture, which Jim Battles will address. We want to remind ourselves that the C-suite team really need to look at the identification and mitigation of risks and hazards and culture measurement and performance improvement. The study that Jim will be addressing, and now I'm on slide 19, is probably one of the best indicators of the failed leadership that we have in healthcare because it ties to trust and the trust of the caregivers, which is vital. Governance boards and senior leadership have to make sure that they are informed regarding staff and where the staff are in terms of trust and the ability and the capacity for reporting when things go wrong. We also have to have direct patient input, slide 20. This is formally in the safe practices and absolutely vital. And I see from over our system that the audio will be ready. What I'd like to do is, before I go from slide 21, I'd like to have Kyle roll the tape, please. And again, forgive us because we just recorded this yesterday. It was prepared in the morning, this morning, and we're into fast cycle improvement, and so we thought, here's a great opportunity. Would you roll the tape with Sully, please? Sully, how did it make you feel to hear that Rory held you in such high esteem, that you were his hero?
I felt honored. I also felt an obligation. I wrote a personal note to the family after his death. And one of the things I said to them was that the world will miss not only who Rory was, but who he would have been. And we all know that right now we need more people like Rory. At such an early age, he was 12 years old, he had written a note to the Swedish ambassador to North Korea asking how it was possible that the North Korean dictator had a large army when he couldn't feed his people. And he acted on things that some of us only feel.
What's your message to quality and safety leaders today regarding Rory?
Get up out of your chair, leave your office, walk down to the emergency department and ask, could this happen here? And show me why not.
This is a very powerful story, and it really addresses the fact that when we order a test, we are responsible for the result.
Absolutely. And we need to not discharge the patient until we get the result, or make sure that someone is responsible to close the loop if they must leave before the test results are complete.
So in aviation, commercial aviation, military aviation, private aviation, we have checks and balances for discrepancies and when we're waiting for a test result. Is that a fair statement?
Absolutely. We have processes in place to make sure that the loop is closed.
And this is something that we really can bring over to healthcare, isn't it?
It's a direct crossover we could apply tomorrow to medicine. These aren't complicated. It doesn't require complicated technological systems. We do it with paper every day, and it works.
So this is a brief set of clips which we will provide in more detail after we finish the movie, and provide a 10-minute training module using Rory's story as it's been reported in the newspapers, and maybe perhaps even with his family, tying critical test results, culture, and the opportunity that we have. And so we just like to reinforce, use this story. It's timely. It's in the New York Times. And as Sully says, we would hope that quality and safety leaders after this webinar would get out of their chair, go to the ED and say, here's a story. Could this happen with us? Is there anything we can do today? And because so often we feel that we're hostages at the table and that bureaucracy won't allow us to do the things we need to do. Here's a great opportunity for safety and quality leaders. Back to slide 21, culture measurement, feedback, and intervention. This is a setup for Jim. It's critical. We've laid that out in the N2F Safe Practices, and Jim was one of the co-authors of that Safe Practice, as he was a co-author of the Safe Practice 3, which is slide 22. I would remind you all to go ahead and take a look at those and look at the issues regarding identification and mitigation of risks and hazards, and again, Jim was a lead co-author of our Safe Practice 4, that addresses that, which I have up for slide 24. So the soft area of culture actually ties very directly to risk identification and mitigation, and he'll share with you how frequent it is that our caregivers are reluctant to even let the leaders know when an error is involving because they're worried about themselves. So what I'd like to do now is shift over to Jim. Jim is a very humble individual. He is a former captain and is a current captain, retired captain in the Navy regarding and has served on ships. He has been the lead champion, as I talked to Carolyn Clancy at the Agency for Healthcare Quality Research. She comes back and said, Jim's our guy to talk about this culture issue. Very gifted, very dedicated, and a great example of some of the great public servants that we have on our team in Washington. Jim, would you take us away?
Thank you, Chuck. As Chuck mentioned, and this is a little sort of truth, full disclosure, I am a retired captain in the United States Navy with a combination of 37 and a half years combination of active duty and Naval Reserve activity. And as I began many years ago my journey into patient safety, the framework and lens often that I look through for patient safety has been influenced by my naval background. And one of the first things that I encountered in patient safety was the iceberg model of errors and accidents, and usually displayed as a triangle. But I suddenly said iceberg, and then I thought of the Titanic. And one of the things that is useful, I think, it's been, 100 years. April 1912, the Titanic was the world's most technologically advanced liner. But despite all the technology innovations, the ship sank on its maiden voyage with the loss of life of over 1,500 people. Well, the Titanic continues, even though it's been 100 years. We're fascinated by the disaster, and particularly a number of years ago with the discovery and actually filming of the Titanic on the bottom of the ocean, and movies and other things have kept this alive. So we can learn a great deal from the Titanic disaster. Even though that occurred 100 years ago, there are many, many lessons about safety, the concept of latent conditions. Everything that led to the loss of life on the Titanic was in place on that ship before it ever left port. But one of the things that happens when we have a disaster is that we start focusing on blaming an individual. Now, there's a very long-standing tradition in the maritime services is the captain goes down with the ship. Well, why is that? Well, if they'd gotten on a lifeboat and come ashore, they probably literally would have been hung. Now, that's true for the commanding officer, the captain. Now, CEOs and other stuff oftentimes jump on lifeboats and survive, but captains, they would have probably hung him. Now, if Captain Smith, it suffers as the naval service, but this concept of perfectionism among professionals, that we have to have perfect performance all the time. For example, many of our nursing and professional practices are really incompatible with human nature. In nursing, for example, it's often been the case if you've had 3 or more reported errors, literally off with your head. Does this encourage reporting? In many ways, our employee graveyards are filled with people who, if only they had followed procedures. This notion of perfectionism is sometimes counter to what human beings can and should be able to do. This quote from Lucian Leap, I think, is always important. Ironically, rather than improving safety, punishment makes reducing errors much more difficult by finding strong incentives for people to hide their mistakes, thus preventing the recognition and analysis and corrective behavior and the underlying cause. So this notion of perfectionism permeates healthcare even today, despite all the discussion about safety is a property of systems, not just individuals. And then we have people who have a more enlightened, if Captain Smith had only dented that iceberg, he would have been sent to the White Star In-Service Training Center for iceberg spotting procedures in the North Atlantic. This notion of blame and train, well, he probably could have taught the course given his experiences. So this notion, if, we're going to blame and then we're going to retrain you, is probably one of our big traps we still face in healthcare. So what is culture? What is this notion of safety culture and culture? Basically, culture is what an organization does. It's the practices, procedures, and processes we use every day. It's the way things we do our operations here, the way we do things here. It is not primarily an emergent property of the beliefs and values. We can mouth all kinds of slogans, first do no harm, but it's what we do in practice that really shapes the organization. So safety culture really is a key protective factor in high-risk industries. It shapes discretionary behaviors. Rules, standard operating procedures can only go so far. So it's the things that people actually do that support the SOP, not the SOP that's sitting on the shelf gathering dust, but what people do every day. It provides a backdrop for the more specific safety intervention. So if you're going to try to do any kind of improvement, such as event reporting, focus on healthcare-acquired infections or associated infections, culture plays a major role in success or failure of those interventions. And it affects all parts of the organization that can fail. Now, in any patient safety presentation, we have to sort of present Jim Reason's famous Swiss cheese model. But as part of those moving holes in the Swiss cheese, culture is such an important surrounding, shall we say, casement for the protection of the cheese. Ron Westrom from Western Michigan is probably the world's leading guru on organization safety for all industries. And Ron has developed this sort of safety culture continuum. It has three kind of phases. And I want you to think about as I go through these phases or categories, where's your organization? On one end of the scale, we have the pathological organization. Everything is perfect. We're really good. And if we're not good, we don't want to hear about it. So we execute the messenger. It's kind of like the rule of the captain or the CEO is always right. Rule number one. And rule number two, if the captain or the CEO isn't right, see rule number one. That's the characteristic of pathological organizations. They do not want to hear unpleasant news or that things aren't perfect, and they do a lot of things to protect themselves from that knowledge. Then we have the bureaucratic organization. It's a little more enlightened. We follow all the rules. So in healthcare, we all follow the Joint Commission's patient safety goals. But they just follow the rules. Well, we were following the rules, but did you really go beneath the rule and actually understand what it is, rather than simply a check mark? Oh, we did that. Yeah, yeah, but do you really do that? Where we really want to be on the safety culture continuum is to create a kind of generative or learning organization where we can learn from our misadventures and other events, create a kind of culture where people can tell us what's going on the floor, and that we can act on it, and that we can have multiple channels of communication. Because if people aren't able or willing, because of either the bureaucratic or pathological nature and structure of the organization itself is going to suffer. Well, why measure patient safety culture? One, if you're a bureaucratic organization, you'll say, well, the Joint Commission says we must, right? That's one of the patient safety goals. Well, let's look what's behind it. One is it can raise awareness of patient safety issues amongst the organization staff. You can understand the status of culture in your organization, your hospital, and you can track that over time. Because if we're trying to improve culture, we ought to know where we stand. What do people feel? What do they believe? And what do they act on? You can also evaluate specific patient safety interventions or programs. So, for example, in our national program for CUS for central line infections, assessment of culture was very important in terms of measuring where we were, how likely the intervention was going to work, and in fact the intervention supports the change of culture. It also satisfies, obviously, the Joint Commission rules and regulations. And you could also make comparison internally and against other hospitals. And I'll talk more about this later, we have a series of comparative database reports that has been supported by AHRQ and are available to look at where other hospitals are, where your hospital or organization is relative to others. A little bit of background. Now, I am going to be concentrating for this presentation on AHRQ-specific tools for measuring patient safety, and namely our hospital survey on patient safety. But it is a public domain instrument for hospitals, healthcare systems, and researchers. It's practical and easy to use. It provides actionable information. It's reliable and valid. And most important, it is in the public domain, and it is free, no restriction on its use. You've paid for it with your tax dollars. And it was developed as a cooperative amongst numerous federal agencies under the old QUIC. So it is the federal instrument that is available. So we also have the hospital survey, as we call it, SOPS. We've also developed a patient safety culture for medical offices and nursing homes, and we are under development for pharmacy services, primarily looking at community-based pharmacies. These 12 items have come to form a kind of dimensions or boundaries of what we mean by safety culture. So it is, the first one is the overall perceptions of safety. How does your organization feel about it? How often are events reported? What is your supervisor or manager's expectations at promoting safety? One of the things that's key to remember is that often safety is a function of an individual unit as well as the overall organization. There may be as wide a variation between units in a hospital as there is between individual hospitals. So this number 3 is important. What's the attitude toward organizational learning and improvement? Teamwork within units, communication and openness, feedback and communication about error and non-punitive response to error, staffing, hospital management support for patient safety, teamwork across units, handoffs, and transitions. So this forms kind of a conceptual frame and has served as kind of a shared mental model about what we actually mean by the dimensions of safety culture. We also have 2 questions, a kind of an overall grade, a gestalt. Where is your organization with an A through E measurement? And then one of the components is the number of individuals have reported in the last 12 months. So there's 51 items on the survey. The SOPS instrument, we have a toolkit, safety guide, the survey, the dimensions. We have a PowerPoint template to use, a description of the development, and an article on the use of culture assessments. They're all in a tool that's downloadable from our website. So you can choose a variety of ways to measure using this tool. You can do web surveys. Tools like SurveyMonkey have made it really easy. You can do paper surveys, both formal paper or using scannable forms. And if you have a large organization, moving to a kind of a scannable form, the Scantron type forms are useful. And then you can do a combination of both. Mixed mode's a little more complicated, but you need to do a lot to recruit and get people to participate regardless of the method that you use. So you have to publicize the survey at staff meetings, newsletters, attain support, letters from administration, and if you're a union shop, involve the union, get them involved in this, patient safety committees and others. To maximize response, notification letter. Most hospitals are conducting the survey anonymously, although it is sometimes useful to have some kind of a code so that you can find out and track non-responders. And you can use individual or group incentives to reward or encourage people. We do provide an analysis tool in the user's guide that you can do. We look at some standards. Items with 75% or greater can be noted as strengths, and those items with a 50% positive can be areas for improvement. And you can adjust these sort of internal cut points, if you will, for your own purposes. And then you can compare results through our comparative databases that are available on the AHRQ website. One of the critical components, though, if you're going to do assessment of culture, is to share the survey reports with staff. If you are not going to share or do anything with your culture data, you probably will do more harm to your organization by administering and doing nothing, providing feedback, than that approach. So you have to be committed to providing critical feedback. And you need feedback. It's not an end, but it's a beginning of the safety improvement. You need to focus on what you found on the overall summary of the strengths and areas for improvement. And you need to deliver feedback in a top-down cascading process to all units who participated in the survey. And so this kind of shows you, you can share it with the board of directors, with your leadership of your medical and nursing and other departments, down through the units, all the senior leaders, your departments, units, etc. Each of those need to be involved and engaged, both taking the survey and then sharing the results. Now, we do have, as I mentioned, the comparative database. This, we are prohibited by OMB for using the term benchmarking. So it is a comparison. You can compare the results of the efforts to establish and improve and maintain culture. So you can compare within your own organization. You can compare unit to unit. For some systems, let's say like an Ascension healthcare system, you can compare the different institutions within a system as well as down at the unit level within an organization. It's used for assessment and learning, and it's a supplemental information to hospitals for other kinds of improvement activities. So the latest database was submitted with data from July, released in April 2012. So the data itself is from 2011. We had 1,032 hospitals representing nearly 500,000 respondents. And the average respondent per hospital is 284. It also contains information of over 500 hospitals that have administered the survey more than once. And this is the years that we have available over time. You can see the survey, 50% response rate with paper, 25% response, and then about 19 mixed mode. So paper response is highest, followed by web, and mixed is a combination kind of between the two of them. And this gives you a chart of the bedsides, all of who participated. And this goes, this particular slide looks at the response from different types of professionals. One of the challenges that we do face with all of them is be sure that we get attending staff, MDs, residents, also advanced practice professionals, making sure that they participate. Their value is really important. And this shows also the percentage of response by department. If you look at separating the sort of strengths, what are the items that are considered strengths within hospitals from the National Comparative Database? Teamwork within units, supervisors, expectations, and patient safety goals, grades seem to be the most important. Areas for improvement, and this has shown consistently over the years, and so this is our challenge, this non-punitive response to error. We still have, if we look at this national results, a kind of punitive culture in healthcare. The other areas that are troublesome is the work of handoffs and transitions and the number of events reported. These are our challenges. So this gives a rank order of the percent positive of the 12 dimensions with teamwork within units, supervisor and management expectations. These are the strongest areas. And then as you move down mid-level, communication and openness, communication feedback, not as strong. Frequency of event reporting, and then you get down to the bottom. And this is the troublesome area, is handoffs and transitions and non-punitive response to error. This is where we need to focus our attention. And this shows you how people are viewing the grade, excellent and very good. So we're doing all right there, but there's still room for improvement. And this gives a number of events reported. This is troublesome because you can see the majority, over 75%, it's either 1, 2, or none. So the number of events people report matches that sort of non-punitive response to error. And then here's some things from the trending hospital. You can expect over time that culture is going to move fairly slowly. Do not expect radical changes from one year to the next. We do recommend that you do not do the survey more frequently than a year, but 18 months is a good average. So here's some of the results. And then you can use the information really for action planning, because it's really not just doing the survey, it's acting upon the information. And there are sort of 7 action planning steps to give hospitals. Understand your survey results, communicate and discuss the survey results, and develop focused action plans, and communicate the plan as deliverables. Implement the actions, track your progress, share what works, and then link your results to other quality and safety improvement efforts. For example, if you're involved in teamwork improvement using something like Team Steps or CUSP, Comprehensive Unit-Based Safety Program for the elimination of healthcare-associated infections or other activities. These are good measures to integrate with these improvement efforts. Also, it's really important to take your culture results and compare them to other measures, such as the patient's experience of care. The perception of staff and what patients are telling you really correlate. There is a linking. So in some cases, patients are telling you, staff are telling you, kind of screaming at you areas that need improvement. And these also correlate with areas of improvement. Now, one of the things that has really been encouraging for me personally, because I've been engaged in working on this for nearly 20 years, is that the HSOPS, as we call it, has really become the worldwide de facto standard across the world. It is used by the WHO High Fives program. It's used in 23 countries, including Japan, Korea, Taiwan, Singapore, Germany, Netherlands, the Nordic countries, Spain, Saudi Arabia. So one of the things that's happened is we've now created this kind of worldwide conceptual model of what we mean by culture in healthcare. Now, this has led to something that I think we should all be very proud of in healthcare, is that we have this worldwide phenomenon, and so we're going to be developing an international comparative database over the next 18 months or so. But healthcare, in many ways, leads the way on safety culture. We always are talking about lessons learned from aviation and other high-risk industries. But on this one area, the measurement of safety culture, healthcare is way out in front. While many other high-risk industries talk about culture, they don't have a shared mental model of what it is. There's lots of debate. Well, what do we mean by culture? Healthcare, we have kind of a common mental model. And healthcare is the only industry in the world that has a comparative database where organizations can compare their results, and share with the public. I defy you to find information on the safety culture of American Airlines or any airline, or the nuclear power industry, or the petrochemical industry. It doesn't exist. You can't find British Petroleum's safety culture on the internet, but you can in healthcare. It's something that I think we as an industry can be very proud of. Now, granted, we have a lot of work to do on improving culture, but at least we have a common shared mental model of what it is, and we're sharing that result, which is really important. So, long-term, ARC will continue to support safety cultures over the next 5 years. We're going to develop the International Comparative Database. We're going to continue to have user meetings, technical assistance, national conference calls, and gather information on linking culture data to other elements. So at this point, I guess I'm going to turn it back to Chuck.
Thank you very much, Jim. I think one of the biggest concerns that we have was the reported, study or report this year of the 2012 data showing that the 600,000 people that were interviewed, 37% were reluctant to report errors, and this is absolutely a huge concern. So I think we've got great penetration of culture survey, and as you say, we've really got critical areas to look at, and I think that the press and purchasers and consumers were pretty shocked by the release of that data. So when we come back to our interactive period, perhaps we could address some of how they're kind of cherry picking some of the most negative information, which really is probably a great scorecard on our leaders and what they could do to really kind of focus. Before we do, however, I'd like to come back to Dr. Frank Maza, who is from the Ascension Healthcare Organization and one of their leading ministries in safety and quality. I've known Dr. Maza for many years, practiced with him when he was a pulmonologist and I was a radiation oncologist, and we were involved in some very leading edge procedural approaches with radioactive seeds that we would put in endobronchial tumors. A terrific caregiver, and I think probably one of the doctor's favorite doctors to work with and patients' favorite doctors, and I think that's why he brings great strength now to the administrative area and a specific area of passion for all of us, which is human performance factors. And we're not giving him a long time today so we can get to Q&A, but we'd like to have him kind of present some of, if you will, a preview of things that we have to come. And we, in our poll, which you'll see will come up, we're asking you as our audience whether you'd like more in the areas that Jim has covered and the area that Frank will cover. And you'll see a poll in the lower right-hand corner. And giving us feedback on wanting more regarding human factors would really help us and help us build this continuing education programs as we go forward. So Frank, a terrific doc, a great safety and quality leader at the Seton Health System in Austin, and someone now doing a deep dive in human factors. Frank, can you give us some insights today?
Well, thanks very much, Chuck, and good afternoon or good morning to everybody, depending on where you're calling in from. Thanks to all of you for being on the call. Again, thanks to Chuck and the team at TMIT for allowing me to participate. As Chuck has mentioned, I'm with the Seton Healthcare family, which is an 11-hospital system that's located in Central Texas. We're based in the Austin area, and as he has also mentioned, we are a unit of the National Ascension Health System. If you're not familiar with Ascension, it's a collection of 80 hospitals nationally and the largest not-for-profit Catholic healthcare organization in the United States. Well, we've just heard from Jim Battles talking about the importance of, and to some extent the difficulties of, changing culture. And we've all heard the catchy snippet that culture eats strategy for lunch. And I heard Chuck himself quote the statistic last week that 56% of RNs are actually afraid to confront a physician when they are concerned that there's an issue about care. And of course, that reflects our culture in healthcare and, if anything, sort of the suboptimal elements of our culture in healthcare. So I am here to address with all of you today what we think is perhaps our own unique approach to using simulation as a methodology to change culture at Seton. And as Chuck mentioned, this is going to be at a very, very high level. To speak to this, I need to create a context, and I hope that you will indulge me while I spend a few minutes doing so before I go through the limited number of slides that I do have. Some time ago, from 2003 to 2008, Ascension Health set out on a national goal of trying to get to zero preventable deaths. And over the course of those 5 years, we really made some pretty stunning improvements in severity-adjusted mortality across our system, and that was also true here at Seton. But at the end of that 5-year period, what we found was that we were still having preventable deaths. So now, Seton, in conjunction again with Ascension Health, has embarked on a new campaign that we've called Healing Without Harm, and our intent coming out of this is to become the largest high-reliability healthcare system in the world by 2014. And those of you who know about high reliability know that the essence of it, or maybe the secret sauce of high reliability, is what's called behavioral accountability. In other words, it's not really possible to be an HRO unless you're able to make broad-scale changes in your culture. You have to do things like flatten your hierarchy, and you have to empower every one of your staff and your medical staff to raise a concern when they have one. So to start with, Seton, again, as part of Ascension, and this is true all across Ascension, have just completed training essentially every one of our leaders, every one of our active medical staff members, and every associate in HRO principles. But we also know that that's not enough to say that we're a high reliability organization. And it's my belief that to really integrate HRO, you not only have to continually reinforce it, but you have to make it real. And that's where our model for simulation comes in. And I'll get to that in just a moment. For those of you who conduct simulation like we do, and we have a 9-bed simulation center complete with a lot of high fidelity and low fidelity mannequins combined, and we have ultra high quality audio-visual capabilities, you know that it's a very, very expensive proposition. And it's not just expensive because of the equipment you have to have, it's also expensive because you've got to dedicate a large amount of time to getting participants away from their normal work activities, and that in and of itself is even more costly. And then to boot, from at least my reading of the literature, there's no guarantee from doing simulations that you're really going to get sustainable improvement from your investment. There's really very, very little data to that regard. We know that when we use simulation and we teach, let's say, physicians or nurses in training how to do procedures, that we probably get some benefit in the long run. But that's really what I'm not talking about today. I'm talking about how can we use the simulated environment to train our staff and our physicians in a way that drives home why we need to adopt the high reliability culture. So fundamentally, we understand that because of the expense involved, we may only get one attempt with these participants, and we want to make sure that we get it right. So here's the model that we are testing. When you study high reliability, you learn that the reason you need to adopt the tools and the practices and the need to be behaviorally accountable is based in human factors. And that is to say that our human performance is limited. Despite our best efforts, we are cognitively and we are physically limited in our capacity to do things. And when you talk about human factors, you really have to enter the realm of cognitive psychology, because cognitive psychology is fundamental to why human factors exist in the first place. They are the reasons for our cognitive limitations. I love this quote from Ernst Mach, where he says, knowledge and error flow from the same mental source. Only success can tell one from the other. Because to me, it's the essence of human factors. What Mach means by this is that to do our daily work and to function as human beings, we have to adopt cognitive shortcuts in our decision-making. This is, for instance, the essence of heuristics. Heuristics are cognitive rules of thumb, and they're cognitive shortcuts that we need to address to get our work done, to do our workflow every day as human beings. We use them every single day. The great thing about heuristics is that most of the time, when we apply them, we get the right results. That may occur maybe 80, 85, 90% of the time. But the problem is with heuristics, and the problem with human factors is that sometimes they're wrong. And an example of this would be, let's assume for a moment I was an emergency department physician and I was working in the ED, and a patient who came in who was hypotensive, who was confused, and who had a very high temperature. The chances are I'm going to apply what's called a representativeness heuristic. I would say, gosh, low blood pressure, confusion, high temperature, that person's got to be septic. And I would do that because it was representative of maybe the last 20 patients that I saw who were hypotensive, febrile, and confused. I'm going to be correct most of the time when I apply that heuristic under those conditions. The problem is sometimes that's wrong. Instead of that patient being septic, let's say another possibility might be that this may be a patient who's living in an enclosed building that's not air conditioned in central Texas heat in the middle of summer. And what they really may have is heat stroke and volume depletion. So heuristics are inherently flawed, even though it's an efficient way to think about how we get our work done, even though it really is something that experts utilize every day. Again, sometimes they betray you. Sometimes they are wrong. So in our mind, the way to get to a higher level of high reliability in making diagnoses, for instance, is to make sure that people are aware that decision-making and human performance that follows decision-making is inherently flawed, and how can we apply high reliability principles like peer coaching and peer checking and 200% accountability and some of the other things we've learned from our consultants from HPI about how we can have a better performance overall and how we can reduce medical errors. So what we do in simulations, we put our staff and our medical staff in a simulated environment. We tell them in advance what the scenario is, and it's usually crisis situation. So let's say we do this in the labor and delivery unit, and we say, guys, we're going to have a postpartum hemorrhage today, or we're going to have someone get septic, and we want you to act out the scenario based on the information you give and do what you do every single day. And we do that because we have found that no matter what, no matter how much we tell them, no matter how much they teach to the test, their performance is suboptimal, and there's great learning in that. They see firsthand that their human performance is limited. So let me give you an example of how we might make this point. And this goes into the category of things that aren't there. This is a picture of railroad tracks going off in the distance, obviously. And why do we know that these railroad tracks are going off in the distance? Well, we have certain two-dimensional cues. One of them is what's called height of the plane, which means that as things go off in the distance, you can see that the tracks tend to rise in the picture. Then there's cues like the texture gradient. You see things that are closer to you have greater texture than things that are farther away. You can also see things like the tracks and the railroad ties converge as they get farther away. These are standard two-dimensional cues that our brain uses every day to tell us that those tracks are going off in the distance. And if we were there, in fact, we would actually use three-dimensional cues as well. But now let me show you the next picture. And let me just ask you which one of these white bars is wider. Actually, if you took out a ruler and you measured them, what you would find is that they're both the same size. When you look at this picture, the tendency is for people to think that the white bar on top is actually wider than the one on the bottom. And the reason for that is because, again, this is a picture of things going off in the distance. We expect that as they go off, they'll get smaller. So our brain is tricking us. Our brain is telling us that if that bar is the same size, in fact, it should be bigger than the one on the bottom. So you could say, okay, well, that's kind of an interesting optical illusion, but what in the world does this have to do with human factors and human performance in healthcare? And what it has to do with is that one of the things that we found when we put people in these simulated environments is that we'll go to the debrief, and let's say a nurse may say to the physician, doctor, why did you give the order for the drug? Why did you give the order that you did at this point in time? And the physician will say something like, well, what are you talking about? I didn't give an order for that. And another nurse will say, well, I heard that too. And then when we run the video, what we find is the physician never gave that order in the first place. And what we've come to realize is, again, by applying this notion of how cognitively our brains will trick us and why it affects our human performance in healthcare, our brains tend to anticipate what people are going to say, and we tend to believe that they have said things even though they have not actually said it. And in part, it's related to our working relationship with those people and what we expect them to say. So we point out to people, gosh, you know, if we were validating and verifying what the orders were that were being given every time, we wouldn't have had that opportunity for an error and wouldn't have made that error. Now, let me give you another example, and this is in the category of things that are there. And a lot of you, I'm sure, have seen this video. It's a famous one by Daniel Simons. I think he's a psychologist out of Columbia University, I believe. But this is taken from his famous gorilla experiment. And for those of you who have not seen this video, what Simon does is he shows you a video of two teams, one team with black shirts, one team with white shirts, and they're passing basketballs back and forth to each other. And he says, what I want you to do is to watch this video and look at the white team and tell me the number of times they passed the basketball to each other. And people tune into this and they watch things going back and forth. And what happens is at the end of the experiment, he says, okay, folks, how many times did you see the basketball get passed? And some people say, well, it's 13 times, some say 14 times, some say it's 15 times. And then he mentions the exact number of passes that occurred. But then he says to them, oh, by the way, did you see the gorilla? And a lot of people who are watching this say, well, what are you talking about? He says, well, in the middle of all this, a gorilla walked across the stage. And they say, well, that's ridiculous. I didn't see any gorilla. And he backs up the video. And what you see when he replays it is that, in fact, in the middle of all of this, a gorilla walks across the stage, stops in the middle, beats his chest, and then walks to the other side. And in human factors and in cognitive psychology, this is known as inattentional blindness. And what that basically says is at any one point in time, despite the fact that our visual field is very big, we're focusing only on a very small part of it. And that's the part that's related to our fovea, which is a very small area on our retina where we have the most enhanced color vision and where we have the most clarity. And if you want to see how great the area of the fovea is, just take your arm, extend it all the way out, and look at your thumb. That's it, for the whole visual field that you can see in your sight right now. That area of your thumb is all that you are typically focusing on at any one point in time. The only way you see anything and attend to anything in your peripheral field is if it's highly salient, if it's brightly colored, or if it's flashing, or something like that takes your attention away. Otherwise, you're just focusing on a very small point at any one point in time. And as a matter of fact, one of the really interesting things to me is that actually our eyeballs jerk about 10 to 40 times a second. These are called saccades, and we actually sample small pieces of our environment 10 to 40 times per second. Our brain doesn't see that as a jerky moment. It tends to smooth them all out. But again, the point is we only attend to what we are attending to at one particular point in time. So in our experiments in our testing in the simulation lab, the way this is relevant is that we have seen over and over again, and we see this, by the way, in our bad outcomes as well at Seton. We have times when someone in the room is aware that something bad is happening, but they don't say anything. And we say to them, why didn't you say anything? And they say to us, well, you know, I was in the room, but so was Dr. Smith. He had to see what was going on. And we point out, no, Dr. Smith didn't see what was going on. He was attending to something else, and here's why. Again, we're trying to make the human factors element very real so that they understand in a high reliability organization, you've really got to, you've got to apply the fact that you make the assumption that someone is not attending, you're covering you're being their wingman, you're covering their back, you're pointing it out so that you have a better level of human performance. So what can we sort of summarize here in terms of how we're using simulation strategy and human factors and what we're testing? First is, as I pointed out, we think that the training should allow trainees to develop their own mental models. We want them to see for themselves when they give their high fives after they've done that postpartum hemorrhage, that cardiac arrest, saying, boy, didn't we do a great job? We actually point out that their performance was suboptimal. It's a great time for learning from them. It's a great way, we think, although we haven't yet validated this, to bring home the point that they have to deal with the human factors to get to a higher level of reliability. Secondly, we want to convey to them that perversely, it's good to make errors. This is where we learn where the system is vulnerable and how we learn to recover. Remember that one of the principles of high reliability is commitment to resilience. It means that you want to re-engineer your system so that you don't have the opportunity to make the same error. And then in our simulated environment, we want to introduce error as an important part of the training experience. We actually have actors in the room so that when that physician gives an order, the nurse intentionally deviates from what she or he is supposed to be doing. Because we want to go back to that physician and point out, you know, this is why three-way verification is really important. That could have been an error. Or in fact, we introduced an error. Guess what? We didn't catch it because you weren't looking at you weren't thinking in a high reliability format. This is why you have to do it. So with that very, very high level overview, I'm going to pass it back to Chuck. Thank you all very much.
Well, thank you very much. And I can tell you that I'm filling out my poll that I want to hear more about high reliability. I want to hear more about human performance factors, and I want to hear more about culture and how we can tie these things together so that learning can be within the organization. And so I would love to have everyone in the right lower hand corner of their screen answer the poll so that we can get a good feedback from all of you. And again, this is a free webinar. You'll get CME, CEU credits, and it's our audience that actually drives the bus, and we're very pleased to have an 87% Net Promoter Score, I think primarily because we're listening to you. So please tell us, and then we will have these wonderful speakers back. What I'd like to do is take a few minutes now to kind of open up the dialogue. And I'll preface this, and I think we'll come right back to you, Frank, because you've really addressed some, I think, exciting things, and then go to Jim Battles and then to Jennifer. But I had the wonderful honor, Frank, I'm on the President's Circle of the National Academies of Sciences and the Institute of Medicine. In fact, spent the evening last night or night before last with Harvey Feinberg, the president, who did a wonderful job presenting the base case now out in the community for patient safety and quality. And I think we're seeing from you, Frank, some of the really exciting things that can be put to work in our team-based training and applying the wonderful work in team steps and that kind of thing that has been done with ARC, and now applying some of these wonderful principles. This weekend, I had the honor, because I am on the President's Circle, 6 of us were invited to be out on the aircraft carrier John C. Stennis. So I was out in the Pacific filming and taking pictures of the choreography and the ballet that occurs on the flight deck with kids average age 20 years of age, and saw in action the high reliability organization at work with multiple individuals and multiple colored shirts recovering aircraft and launching aircraft in the most amazing way with a highly dangerous environment. And the fact is that there are no trainers, Frank. They are training each other the way I think you all are doing, at Seton. So can you give us some more insights as to how one might take some of these principles to scale across an organization, and what your intention to do is to do that? Because these are very, very good learnings that I think we need to really put to work across an organization. So my question is the vision for scale, Frank.
Well, that's a great question, and I wish we knew the answer to that. I would tell you that now that we've been done sort of sheep dipping everybody in what high reliability principles are, I think what we want to do is take a very, very targeted approach across our entire network and system of hospitals for how do we make it real. So for instance, one of the things that our consultants taught us about tools for high reliability is a tool called STAR, which is to stop, think, act, review when you have a critical process. And this is, in my mind, STAR is something you apply when you're doing an automatic task. When we are in expert mode, what happens is that we do things highly automatically because we actually don't have to apply a whole lot of attentional resources to getting the job done. So we make errors that, using James Reason's language, errors that are slips and lapses. Well, if I drive to work in the morning and I'm going to my usual hospital and I should have gone to another hospital and I make that slip and a lapse, that's no big deal. I don't know that I need to star where I'm driving to during the day, because I get to the hospital so early, I just turn around and drive a couple of miles and I'm at the place that I'm at. But you know, if I'm going to do a thoracentesis, or if and I want to be concerned about doing the right side versus the wrong side, or if I'm doing a critical process, like I'm labeling flasks that I've just drawn some materials from, some blood from, so I make sure that I've got the right person identified. I think what we're thinking about doing is saying, how do we apply STAR? How do we say we're gonna say that everybody in the organization who draws blood needs to apply STAR? We're going to say that everyone who's doing, let's say, a thoracentesis on a medical unit needs to apply STAR. And we want to make it real, and we want to highlight that, and we want to push that over and over again to try and have people see how that could be beneficial in terms of reducing our errors, our potential for error.
Thanks so much, Frank. Great insights, and I would really want to have you come back and take us on a deep dive in a webinar in this space. Jim, you've been answering a few of the questions, and I want to draw the attention of our audience to the Q&A window on the webinar here to submit questions. Jim, do you want to recap a couple of the answers that you've given? And I particularly like the question that was asked by Marty Hand, and that was from slide 35. Please provide a few examples and suggestions on how to move an organization from bureaucratic to a learning environment. Jim?
Yes, I think that that's going to be one of the biggest challenges that we have, because if the organization, and many of our organizations have been somewhat bureaucratic in nature, there's this swelling of distrust. One of the things to start with is if you're going to do the survey, be willing to act on it. You're also going to have to engage the frontline managers, because you can have the CEO of the organization talk about how we're moving to a generative organization, but if those unit managers are not on board, that will fail. So you have to begin to really push hard to get sort of people moving. One of the ways that one can do that is to examine one's HR procedures. Do you have HR procedures that are incompatible with a generative culture? So what are your procedures? If, when is it an incident report? Are they used for personnel action? You have to separate event reporting and incident reporting from personnel action. So you have a lot of investigation of what are those internal traps within our organization that we have to eliminate, and then work very hard for encouraging people to speak up, both at unit levels. You may find in your organization that you may have mid-level managers, unit managers, who by their very nature they may not be able to move into the direction that you want, and you may have to make changes.
Great. And I'd like to come back to Frank and ask you the question which I have coming in, and I've also had in my mind. Do you believe that it would be a good idea to get at least an hour or two of human factors knowledge under one's belt if you're running RCAs, root cause analyses? Because there are things embedded in just what you presented today that would lead us to be very careful regarding investigations after an accident and doing a root cause analysis. So recap of the question. Do you think that human factors study at least a couple hours would be very helpful to those that are leading root cause analysis or conducting them?
I think the answer is most absolutely yes. It's interesting, when I've looked at some of the questions around root cause analyses that some organizations have, you can see that the questions they're answering are embedded in human factors theory. It's just not sort of made explicit. But I think absolutely, positively, the more that folks have in this, the better job they'll do, because they'll have a greater understanding of human performance and why failures occur.
So Jim and Frank, if TMIT were to put together a learning package that were the latest insights that might help us with root cause analyses, do you all believe that might, from your social networks and relationships, that might be a productive and a good place to put TMIT resources?
From my perspective, I would say yes, because I think that is one of the areas that we really need a lot of work on, is because just doing an RCA, you could almost do more damage if you don't do it right and come to conclusions that are not particularly useful. So that's something that I think it would be most valuable.
And I don't know that I could say it more eloquently the way Jim just did. I'll just say that I completely agree. Yes, I think that would be a great benefit for folks to have.
Fantastic. So I think we'll make that decision today, because we need to make decisions like this and act on them, and I think it just really makes a lot of sense. Jim, let me come back to you on a couple of the questions that were asked of you in the Q&A panel. One was including pharmacists. Do you want to recap your answer to that request?
Yes, we are developing a pharmacist survey, but it's primarily designed for pharmacists in community pharmacies. If you're doing the hospital survey for patient safety, you want to include the pharmacist as part of that survey as part of the overall organization, because you do want to get that perspective of the pharmacist as they perceive things within the context of your overall culture. That's the same thing with your medical staff, physicians, residents. Oftentimes they don't view themselves as part of the organization, but they are. So you have to have special activities to do. It's also, if a pharmacist is embedded in a nursing home, you want to include them. In some of the medical office settings, we actually have embedded pharmacists, so they should be included in those surveys if they're part of that organization. Again, we're developing the pharmacist culture survey primarily for the independent community-based pharmacy that is freestanding and not embedded within an organization.
Great. And I'm going to go to Jenny right now, and I think that I know the answer, but I'd like you to express the voice of the patient and families. Was Dr. Maza's presentation insightful to you to help explain why errors and harm can occur that's not just completely reckless? And will this help you kind of counsel the patients and families that you counsel regarding errors that occur and the fact that they can unconsciously occur by well-meaning caregivers not knowing that their own performance has some gaps? Jenny?
Oh, absolutely. I think it was very moving, and I know some of my colleagues are listening today, and I'm hoping that they too will spread the word. Thank you so much.
Frank, coming back to you now on Jenny, on the shoulders of what Jenny just said, do you think there's a place for us to share human factors and human performance factors insights to patients and families that are caring for themselves, so they can understand some of their own potential gaps in what they might do, and explain why adherence to medicines, compliance, the ability to take medicines properly throughout the entire course is so low at 50%. So recap question, Frank, human factors, science, important for patients and self-education?
Absolutely. And where my head was going when you were mentioning this question and teeing it up was, if you think about let's say, the Joint Commission's efforts to get patients involved in their care, I would say one of the reasons we need to make this case to patients and their families is that, again, no matter how hardworking people in healthcare are, when they get distracted, when they're tired, when they are working in automatic mode, they're going to make errors. And the more you get involved in the care and the more that you challenge your healthcare givers, it allows them to give better care, because you're making it much less likely that their human performance and human factors are going to affect what they're doing so that they make errors.
Well, Frank, I have a terrible admission to make on a global webinar, but I can tell you that my little boy cut his head open, Charlie, and it was a very deep gash. We got the best plastic surgeon we could find on short notice at a great hospital. We brought him in, and while he was sitting on my lap, they made an error on his weight for anesthesia, and we're about to give him 2.2 times the amount of anesthetic, and the anesthesiologist caught it, and none of us would have caught it because it was a kilos to pound conversion issue, which shook us up already. So I'm a shake-it-up dad, and my wife Betsy and the mom, and then we had a near miss. And after our little boy was recovered, we were just breathing so much easier. And we failed to go and get the antibiotic that was given for him operatively when they sewed him up. And as a result, I think he has a little more scar than he would need to, because I think he got a little bit of an infection there. And I always look back on that and go, here I'm somebody who's so passionately involved with safety, but my performance was degraded. I was the caregiver, primary caregiver in the family. My wife was driving the car, and Frank, it was a lapse that I think also stress is a major component to degrading performance, and especially when it's personal stress, the way it was for us. And I always look back on that and go, how did I do such a bonehead move? But it was after a very stressful near miss that could have killed him, and yet I missed on and had the prescription and missed on adherence. And so I think this area, what we have covered at the IOM is called the socio-technical model, in the recent IOM report, which is terrific, on HIT, but it really gives us, I think, a newfound, or at least this should keep us focused on the fallibility of human performance, and that we have to build in systems to compensate for a lot of gaps we're unaware of. Frank, you were very good about your time, and we gave you less time. Are there other things that have surprised you in your deep dive education on human performance that our audience might appreciate? Other things about lapses that particularly jump out at you that you didn't cover today?
Well, yeah, and actually I think you brought up something that is very, very, very important, which is the contribution of stress that is a tremendous decrement. To some extent, it actually enhances our human performance, but when there's so much stress, there's a tremendous, tremendous decrease in our performance that occurs as a result of it. Well, the healthcare environment is profoundly stressful. And how many times do we have, let's say, a sudden cardiac arrest, or people who have, there's an emergency in the operating room, and that team has to perform. And if we were airline pilots, we'd be going into the simulation lab, and we would be proactively thinking about what should we be doing and how should we be addressing that if it occurs, and we know it's going to occur. But we don't do that in healthcare. And I think for us to be able to focus on the contribution of stress to how well we do, and to figure out a way to do that in a way that doesn't cost a boatload of money, because again, simulation's a very, very expensive way to do it, I think would be very, very beneficial. And when you introduce that sort of thing to people, and you reference things like the Vincennes incident, and even Sully Sullenberger talking about this overwhelming sense of stress in the aircraft as he was trying to land it on the Hudson, I think it could be very, very valuable for the group as well.
Well, thank you so much. I'm going to come back to both you and Jim, and I'll go to Jim first. Douglas Doughton says in his question, one of the problems with doing a root cause analysis is that most mishaps, if not all, are multiple cause. We do RCAs to find blame. Doing a course in how to do an RCA does not make one an expert. Using trained and experienced teams is critical, and he says PSOs question mark. Before I go to Jim, I'm going to announce that it looks like on the West Coast, we will be undertaking the development of 3 red cover reports with John Nance and Sully Sullenberger on 3 very common, and we're going to develop composite cases. So they're real facts of real cases that are combined to create fictitious cases of very typical events that are high impact, high volume, and highly preventable, and then demonstrate the NTSB approach at multiple source, multiple cause issues that really contribute to the cascade, because all of us are jet pilots. We've all had to go through a lot of this training that's multi-causal. And in fact, a shout out to the John C. Stennis crew on the aircraft carrier. Their captain is very passionate about human factors and the issue of eustress and distress that you've just mentioned, Frank, and how it decays or degrades carrier pilot abilities to land. So I'm going to recap a short question to you and to Jim and ask Jim first. Jim, your take on multifactorial issues, and do you think that there are improvements that we can build on with root cause analysis to really look at multiple causal agents that are more systems oriented by some of these other techniques? Jim, and then go to Frank.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we've had sort of something that has gone to sort of a disservice is to where we've had systems that look for the primary root cause. There's the philosophy that there are multiple causes, and so that our approach is to broaden the notion of the contributing factors, because virtually every event is going to have many contributing factors that led to the event, and to be able to use an approach that, like the Gano approach, that looks at multiple causes is absolutely essential. And there are models like the PRISM model that Tjerk van der Schaaf developed that are very, very useful in moving in that direction.
And Frank?
Well, I would say that I would have to confess I don't have the same knowledge of the literature that Dr. Battles does in this case. But in my mind, this is a terrific question for us to investigate in a research setting. I think you put people in a simulated environment, you immerse them, you set them up to perform, you see where they fail, and then you survey or you test why that failure occurs, and then you re-engineer your systems to make it better in the end.
Great. We're now at our sign-off time, and we have, I know, hundreds of hospitals on that dedicate this time for training, and I don't want to have them miss out on follow-on. I think what I'd like to do is I will go to Jenny. I do want to mention that speaker link is a very important factor of what we're doing. I'm going to show a couple of slides, 74 and 75. You'll see Regina Holiday on the cover of our landing page with speaker link. This is a free system. I'm on slide 76 to register, not only to be a speaker, but to find a speaker, and it is the only venue really that has been uniquely designed to get patients and families in your boardroom and on your safety teams. And we've just had great reviews of a number of speakers that have been found through SpeakerLink that we developed actually as a result of a request by our patients and families who want to come in and help you, and would hope that you would do so. I'd like to come back to Jenny and have her close us today, and just remind you to fill out the polling survey if you would, and that we will post an article that Jenny is a co-author of, because I think, Frank, it hits this human factors issue. Are you listening? And it's a summary of a number of the resources in human performance as they relate to caregiver to caregiver, caregiver to patient, patient to patient interaction. And Frank, perhaps a future article you could co-author with us to update that, because it sounds like you're becoming a great expert. I'd like to thank everybody involved, and I'd like to come back to Jenny, and Jenny, close us. And when you hear Jenny close, if the speakers could stay on just for a couple minutes so we could do a rapid cycle a review of anything we could do better. And Jenny, would you please close us?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Denham. It's just been a pleasure and an honor to be here today. It was a great webinar, and I can't stress enough how important it is to include patient and families in all facets of their health care. Invite them to the table of their own health care to be participants, active participants. It will make your job so much easier. It'll make our system safer, and you'll be surprised on how much better things are going to go in the future when we start doing that across the board. I can't thank you all enough for being here today, and I look forward to the fruits of all of this labor today and seeing great things happen in the future. Have a wonderful day, and thank you.
Thank you, Jenny.